Imagine waking up one morning, turning on the TV, and the news is about a major economic crisis. The prices of everything have skyrocketed. Countries are losing their valuable reserves and global trade is collapsing. But what's the reason? A strange crash in the value of the US dollar. You might say, so what? The dollar is just a currency like any other, isn't it? But this is where everything gets complicated. Because the US dollar is not just a piece of paper, it's the power behind the global economy. It's interesting to know that about $7.5 trillion of the existing dollars in the world are held outside the US itself. Countries, large corporations, central banks, and even some of the world's billionaires have billions of US dollars in their accounts. But why? Or for example, why is it that when a transaction occurs between a Japanese company and a German company, the currency used in the transaction is still the US dollar? Or how did the currency of a specific country become the world's primary currency and now controls everything? In other words, how did the US manage to turn its currency into the world's leading power with a smart move? Well, we've thoroughly examined the answers to these questions in this video. But before we get to the main topic, I'd appreciate it if you could like the video and turn on the channel notifications. What do you think is the difference between the world's currencies? This is a US dollar. This is also a Canadian dollar. This is a British pound, and this is a Kenyan shilling. There are significant differences between each of these currencies, both in terms of the impact they have in their own countries and the role they play in other countries around the world. But is the US dollar the strongest currency on this list? Both yes and no. In terms of actual value, the US dollar is not the strongest currency in the world. In fact, it currently ranks 9th among the most valuable currencies in the world. However, in terms of power and dominance over the global economy, it can be said that the US dollar has no rival. But where did the story of the US dollar's rise to power begin? It all goes back to the era of World War II. During that time, the world was deeply embroiled in war and chaos. Countries had lost a lot of their gold reserves to cover war expenses, and their economies were collapsing. But the United States was in a completely different situation. Instead of being destroyed by the war, it was making money from it. But how? By selling weapons, equipment, and raw materials to the countries involved in the war. In fact, countries like Britain and France had to give their gold to the United States to buy these things. I should also mention that before World War II, the world's primary currency was the British pound sterling. So what happened was that by the end of the war, most of the world's gold was in the hands of the United States. At that time, countries were using the gold standard system. This meant that the money they printed had to be equivalent to a specific amount of gold. But now that most of the world's gold was in the hands of the United States, other countries had paper money but no gold to back it up. This is where the United States made a clever move. In 1944, 44 countries gathered at the Bretton Woods Conference and decided to establish a new system. In this system, all the world's currencies became dependent on the US dollar instead of gold, and the United States committed to exchanging any dollar for gold whenever necessary. With this move, the US dollar overnight became the world's reference currency. Interestingly, from the moment the dollar was separated from gold, it took complete control of the world. However, this system had a major problem. The United States had to always store enough gold to match the dollars that existed in the world. And it was clear that such a thing was not feasible in the long term. When the 1960s arrived, some countries, especially France, started converting their dollars into gold because they realized that the United States was printing more money than it should and didn't have enough backing for it. This is where the United States made a historic decision. This is the face of Richard Nixon, the controversial president of the United States, who officially announced in 1971 that the US would no longer back the dollar with gold. This was the moment when the US dollar was officially set free and became a currency valued solely based on global trust. an important question. How is it possible for money that doesn't have real backing to be so powerful? Or in other words, why is the US dollar still the strongest currency in the world? Well, this is where the story of the SWIFT system comes into play. After the dollar was no longer tied to gold, the countries of the world created a new system for international trade, a system called SWIFT. In fact, SWIFT is an interbank messaging system that facilitates international payments. Today, most global transactions are conducted through this system, and the main currency of this network is the US dollar. So what does this mean? It means that even if two countries, for example, China and Germany, want to trade with each other, the US dollar is involved in the transaction. And this gave the United States an extraordinary power. Now, you might think that the SWIFT system was proposed by the United States itself, but that's not the case. In 1973, 239 banks from 15 countries around the world gathered in Belgium and made this decision together. Because at that time, international bank communications were very slow and risky. Until then, banks were using old and insecure methods like telegraph, telephone, and fax, which were very slow and error-prone. That's why the bank said, let's create a network where all the banks in the world can easily send messages and be assured that everything proceeds correctly and safely. Now, all of this led to the United States becoming a powerful country. If a country does not follow the policies of the United States, it can be removed from the SWIFT system, effectively paralyzing its economy. We've seen many examples of this. Well, you might now think that the tariffs Trump imposed on European products last week are due to the influence of the dollar on SWIFT. However, these two are not directly related, but indirectly they do share a common root: the immense economic power of the United States. If I want to make a brief mention of Trump's tariffs, I should say that Trump is looking to reduce the US trade deficit with Europe and China, strengthen American manufacturers, and exert political and economic pressure on competitors. Now, if I want to mention one or two countries that have been removed from the SWIFT system, one is Iran and the other is Russia. Of course, there are other countries as well. Iran was first removed from SWIFT in 2012 due to its nuclear program. However, after the JCPOA agreement in 2015, Iran's access to SWIFT was partially restored. But in 2018, when Trump withdrew from the JCPOA, the US reimposed the sanctions. The other country is Russia, which was removed from SWIFT in 2022 after the attack on Ukraine, causing the Russian ruble to plummet significantly. Of course, afterwards, the Russians took measures to increase the value of the Russian ruble and the Russian economy, which is not the topic of discussion in this video. On the other hand, the petrodollar system also plays a role in the rise of the dollar's value. In the 1970s, after the US abandoned the gold standard in 1971, it reached an agreement with Saudi Arabia and other OPEC countries that oil would only be traded in dollars. This decision ensured that the global demand for the dollar always remained high. Of course, the US has another advantage, which is printing money. From 2020 until now, about 80% of all the dollars in US history have been printed. At first glance, this might seem like a bad thing, because when more money is printed, its value decreases and inflation rises. But there is an important point here. The effects of this inflation are not only within the US, but it also impacts all countries that hold dollar reserves. When the US prints dollars, the value of the dollars stored in other countries decreases. It's very interesting. This means the US can take advantage of this opportunity to take international loans, then print more money and pay back its debts with less valuable dollars. Now, you might be asking yourself, what is the future of the US dollar? With the significant advancements the US dollar has made, will this trend continue in the future or not? Well, I have to say that currently, some countries like China, Russia, and the European Union are trying to reduce their dependency on the US dollar. China has even proposed trading oil in yuan, its own currency, instead of dollars. Russia has now allocated more of its reserves to gold rather than dollars. But will the dollar collapse because of these actions? Probably not anytime soon, because the whole world is still dependent on it. But in the coming decades, the situation might relatively change. For example, the British pound was once the main power, but it declined. As I mentioned, after World War I, and especially World War II, the British economy was devastated. So, considering what we've said, the dollar might also be replaced one day, and there's no guarantee it will remain the same forever. Share your opinion. Do you think the US dollar will always remain the world's leading power? Or will a country like China replace it one day? Be sure to write your opinion in the comments so we can have a very heated and controversial discussion together. Now, if we want to summarize, it must be said that usually three main factors cause a currency to be accepted internationally. The first is economic power. The second is developed and open markets, and the third is price stability. Therefore, throughout history, the currency that has met these three conditions better than others has become the dominant international currency, and once a currency reaches the top position, it usually stays there for a long time.